Hello, and welcome to Finale to Dorico, Conquering the Transition. My name is Jason Loffredo, and I'll be your guide today as we explore how adding items in Dorico's write mode differs from adding items in Finale. In part 1 today, we're primarily focusing on entering notes, rhythms, slurs, and articulations. So we know that in Finale, there's actually two different ways to enter notes. We can use the simple entry tool, or we could use the speedy entry tool. And the simple entry tool is going to be duration before pitch. The speedy entry is going to be pitch before duration. The default state of entering notes in Dorico is actually going to be duration before pitch, which is more similar to simple entry, but there is a way to switch it so that it's pitch before duration. I'll get to that a little bit later in this video. But before we do that, let's figure out how to get into note insert mode. I'm actually going to move over to galley view for Dorico and scroll view for Finale for a second. So in write mode, in the left panel, there's a whole bunch of buttons, and this is where we're going to be working mostly today. The second button down is the Start Note Input button, and if you select that, you're going to get a cursor and a grid on top of the measure. I'll talk about the grid a little bit later. Select it again, and you're exiting input mode. Note that there is a shortcut if you hover over that. That is Shift-N, so Shift-N will just do just that. Shift-N will also get you out of it. There's another way to get into note input mode, which I really like, which is you can select either a rest or a note and press the return key to get into note insert, or escape will get you out. Just be sure that you're selecting a rest or note, because if you select something else like a time signature, then you're actually going to be editing that particular item. You can also double click on a rest or a note to get into note input and entry, which is kind of handy sometimes too. And certainly in Dorico, you can use your mouse to get around. You can select the quarter note, add quarter notes, select the eighth note, and basically select anything in these panels to get what you want. So if you need a sharp, just select the sharp and then add it. If you need a flat, you can do that, add a D flat there. If you need to add a dot, you can select the dot and you'll get a dotted eighth and then a 16th, etc. So basically you can click and drag your way around this panel as much as you want. And one other thing I want to point out is that some of these buttons have, like, I don't know if you can see that, but there's a little arrow in the bottom right that indicates that there's more options for that particular function. So if you right click, you're going to see that you have double, triple, and quadruple dots available to you, or you can long press, so press and hold to do the same thing. So we'll get into those a little bit further down. But anyway, that's how you would sort of click and drag you around. And I also want to note something. You note how I'm as I'm hovering with my mouse, you can see that sort of shadow note. That means that I can click any of these positions and get the note there, right? If you are ultimately going to use the keyboard shortcuts, just make sure that you select the arrow button here, and that will prevent that from happening. It just makes it a little bit easier to get in and out of note input mode and selecting things and all that stuff. So that's where we'll go next. We'll talk about entering these notes and rhythms without clicking and dragging. So the idea is pretty much the same thing. We want to select something on the left and then enter it in a certain way on the score. And all of these buttons, most of these buttons have shortcuts, so we just sort of need to figure out what they are. Again, if you hover over something, you'll see the shortcut. And you'll notice that the quarter note here, the shortcut is 6. The half note is 7. The eighth note is 5. And as you know with Finale, these numbers are 1 off, right? The quarter note would be 5 in Finale. So you're more than welcome to try to get used to the new numbers in Dorico, but I strongly encourage you, I've done it myself and I feel no shame about it, is to reprogram these to be more similar to Finale. So let me show you how to do that right away, because I think this is going to help. Go to the Dorico menu, go to Preferences, and what we're looking for is this here called Key Commands. And unless you know what to look for, this is kind of tricky, so I'll tell you what it is. It's Set Note Durations is what you're looking for. So just type part of that and it will narrow it down. It's under Note Input, it's under Set Note Duration. And all of these items here are the shortcuts for those rhythms. So the quarter note you can see is set to 6. The way that this window works is that you select the thing that you need on the left, then select the shortcut in this area, and then press Remove Key Command to remove that shortcut. Then what you do is over here, press in this area and press the new key on your computer keyboard, and then press Add Key Command. And a lot of times you'll get this warning, particularly for what we're doing here. This is fine. This is telling you that the 5 is programmed to something else, which is the 8th note, but we're redoing this anyway. It doesn't matter. Just click OK, and now that 5 is good to go. If you do have an extended keyboard like I do with the number pad, I also recommend adding the 5 from the number pad because they are different. So just make sure that you do 2 of them in this case to get the 5 from the number row and the 5 from the number pad. And then you'd go through and you do all of these durations. Now I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me do this, but I am going to jump cut because I do want to have these reprogrammed for you. So give me 1 second, I'll come back and reprogram all of these. Okay, so I've gone through and reprogrammed everything. You see my whole note is 7. I even did the double whole note and 4 times whole note as 8 and 9. And when you're done, just make sure that you go down here to the bottom right and hit apply, and then hit close, and we should be good to go. And now my quarter note is set to 5, my half is 6, etc. So these are more finale-like. So now all we need to do is press the rhythm that we want, so 5 for quarter note, and then there's 2 different ways to enter the pitch. If you have a MIDI keyboard, just play the pitch, just play the pitch, play the pitch, and you're good to go. You can also do this on the computer keyboard by just typing the pitch. So type F or A or whatever you need, and again, change the rhythm. We can change to eighth notes, G, F, etc., and you're on your way. Now, after you've entered a note like this, you will see that the previous note that you entered is still highlighted orange. And at this point, you can still do things to that note, in particular, change the pitch if you want. With Option and the up and down arrows, you can move the pitch by steps in the scale. The Option plus Shift and the up and down arrows will move chromatically. So A flat, A natural, B flat, B natural, etc. Option plus Command up and down will jump by octaves if you need to do that. In order to get to the natural, flat, and sharp icons here, those keyboard shortcuts are 0, minus, and plus. So if I want a C sharp, I would press, let's do quarter note, plus, and then C, and that will give me a C sharp. If I want a G flat, minus G to give me a G flat. And if I then wanted a G natural, 0 G will give me a G natural. Let me go ahead and add one more G sharp. Again, with that note highlighted, you can respell the accidental if you want to. In Finale, it's a toggle. I'm sure you're familiar with the asterisk key. We'll toggle back and forth. It's not a toggle in Dorico. In Dorico, you're respelling it downwards or respelling it upwards. And the keyboard shortcuts for that is Option, plus, and minus. And the way you think about this is that if you want the G sharp to be respelled in A flat, G goes up to A, so you respell upwards from sharp to flat, right? So Option plus will respell it as an A flat, Option minus will respell it as a G sharp. And you can actually go further, so there's a F triple sharp, or Option plus one more time will give you a B triple flat. So yeah, it's not a toggle in Dorico, it's more like respelling upwards or downwards. If you want to add a dotted note in Dorico, just press the period key before you enter the pitch. So I've got quarter, period, B, right? That will give me a dotted quarter note, except it doesn't give me a dotted quarter note. It gives me a quarter note tied to an eighth note, even though the panel says with that selected that is a quarter dotted. And then interestingly, if I add an eighth note, all of a sudden that turns to a dotted quarter note. So this is very unusual if you're used to Finale, because in Finale you add something and that's the way it is, right? Dorico works a little bit differently. I'm about to get into that. And it's also related to how you enter rests in Dorico. Actually more along the lines that you really don't enter rests in Dorico, right? In Finale, we know that, if we're entering notes, we have to enter the pitches and then manually, press 5 again to enter a quarter note. And then, we need to keep adding the rests as needed, right? Well, it's different in Dorico because in Dorico, rests are not really an actual thing. There's more like the representation of empty space. So when you think of it that way, the thing is that you don't enter the rests, you skip over the rests. You skip over the empty space. And you can do that with the right and left arrows, and right and left arrows will move the cursor along the grid that you see on the top. So I don't need to enter a quarter rest, I just need to move over to beat 4 and then enter a new note, and Dorico will add that quarter rest for me. Does that make sense? Now, of course, this means that the grid has to be changeable, and currently the grid is set to eighth notes. In the bottom left corner, there's this pull-down menu, and this is what the grid is. So the grid is currently set to eighth notes. I can set it to 16th notes, and the grid resolution gets a little bit smaller, so now that right and left will move by 16th notes, not by eighth notes. There is a shortcut for the grid resolution, which is Option, left, and right bracket. Right bracket will make the grid resolution smaller, left bracket will make it larger. So there's eighth notes, that's actually dotted eighths, that's quarter notes, you can go to half notes, even whole notes if you need to. So the grid resolution is important when you're adding rests and things. But the other thing you can do, you don't have to use the right and left arrows, you can also use the space bar, and the space bar will move the amount that the rhythm is selected. So in this case, the rhythm here is quarter note. Spacebar will move over a quarter note. If I were to go back and change it to half note, spacebar will move over a half note. I can even do, a dotted half note, and spacebar will bring me to beat 4 in this particular case. So yeah, you're not actually entering the rest, you're just skipping over the rest. And note that when I'm doing that, you're not seeing the rest appear. It's only after you add the note that Dorico's, making the rest appear the way it's supposed to. So this, combined with this weird thing that, when you delete that eighth note, this becomes a quarter tied to an eighth note, not a dotted quarter note. What's going on? Again, this is a huge difference between Dorico and Finale conceptually. And I think it makes more sense if you think about this a little bit more like a DAW. If you're familiar with Logic or Cubase, this kind of makes sense. The notes themselves are just pure durations. This note is a single note, even though it's 2 notes tied together. In Finale, we know, this is a note tied to a note, and you have to add 3 things, right? In Dorico, this is a single event. In fact, if you go over to play mode and you open the key editor, I'm just going to pull this up so you can see this. This note here that I have highlighted in orange, that's that note in write mode that's highlighted, right? And you can see that this is a single event. It's not like a quarter note and a tie or something. It is one event. Same thing with the rests. It's not like there's an explicit rest in the key editor here. There's nothing that says rest, right? It's just empty space. So that's what I mean by Dorico is considering notes and rest as pure durations and empty space, right? This has some interesting benefits. Like, for example, let's go back here, and instead of entering a half note there, I can enter a whole note, and Dorico is going to enter a whole note that's represented as a half note tied to a half note across the bar. It also provides some other really nifty features, which is that you can manipulate these in a little bit of a different way. One of the things you can do is extend them and shorten them with a special keyboard shortcut. Option-Shift plus right and left arrow will extend or shorten the duration by the amount of the grid. So Option-Shift right arrow will extend that whole note 1 extra eighth note, and it's recalculating all the ties. It's giving me the extra eighth note. If I do it one more time, it's saying, okay, now it can be a dotted half note, right? And you can shorten it and everything. The other thing that you can do is Option left and right arrows will actually slide it over, again, by the rhythmic grid. So if you need to slide it over a 16th note, you would change the grid to a 16th note, etc., right? And so conceptually, it's very different. And the idea here is that all of these entries, these notes, are purely durations. But it's the notation options, Command-Shift-N to get to the notation options, particularly the ones in the note grouping, that dictate how the durations are presented in the staff. And there's a ton of options in the note grouping section, but also in the rests section. There's ways that you can present the rest in the beam groupings. Those 3 areas in particular, especially the note groupings, this is going to dictate how the notes are tied and are not tied. And you can see that there's a ton of options, and there's certain things checked. Like you have the dotted half note here allowed instead of the split at the half bar. If you need to do it differently, select the other option. The one that's related to our dotted half note is this one right here, split at beat boundaries when a note starting on a beat followed by a rest in the middle of the beat is selected like this. If we selected this option, then what happens is that this note here, which was previously a quarter tied to an eighth note, now is allowed to be a dotted quarter note. Once again, if I change that option back, you'll see that it will represent it as a quarter note tied to an eighth note. So it's like Dorico is filtering the pure durations through the notation options before it presents it on the staff. And this is an important distinction between how Dorico works and how Finale works, because in Finale you can just put the notes in however you want, willy-nilly, and it doesn't matter for better or worse, right? So it is really kind of critical to go through and look at these options. This one in particular, is always up for debate whether or not you can allow that quarter note in the middle of the bar like that. Well, the default state of Dorico is actually to select that option versus this option. So if you really think that you really have to have that half bar boundary respected, then choose this option, right? Dorico's not doing it incorrectly. Dorico's just doing it per the note grouping settings, which you can ultimately change. So if you want to see that option, just check that and hit apply, and you're good to go. The other thing here that's related to that is that deleting notes is a little bit different than Finale, because if you select a note and delete it, you're replacing it with empty space. Now we know that in Finale, if you delete a note, it actually slides everything over to the left in that single bar. This is very unique to Finale, actually. There's no other notation app that acts like this. All the other notation apps act like Dorico, where you're replacing a note with empty space. This is more like a word processor where you'd sort of delete a word and the rest of the sentence would move to the left, right? It's not the case in Dorico. You're just sort of replacing the note with empty space when you delete. Now there is a way to make Dorico behave a little bit more like Finale in this very specific way, and it's called insert mode, and it's this icon here. And again, this has an arrow, so if I right click, there's a whole bunch of different options here. I'm not gonna get too much into the details here because there's a great tutorial video I'll try to link to in the description that goes much more in depth in this, but the shortcut here is I, and if I engage that or I press the I key and then I choose that note and delete, you'll see that everything moves off to the left. But it's not just the single bar, it's actually everything, right? Unless I add what's called a insert stop, which you can do like that, and then I can delete that note and it will only slide over that single measure, which is more similar to how Finale works in Speedy entry if you want to do it that way. Again, there's a whole lot of other stuff to know about insert mode and the stop insert function and everything. I'm going to let you watch that other video because it's really good and I don't want to spend any more time here on that. In Dorico, there is a tuplet button in the panel over here, which you can select to engage a tuplet, but the shortcut for that is the semicolon key. And the way this works is to make sure that you select the rhythm that you want first. So if you want an eighth note triplet, select the eighth note, then select the semicolon key, and the tuplet popover appears, and it's pre-populated with the number 3, which is convenient because that's probably the most common tuplet that you're going to use. So once you've selected it, press return, and you'll see that you've created a tuplet there, or triplet, and then you can enter notes as you need. The one thing in Dorico is just be aware that the tuplets are sticky. Like it will stay turned on until you turn it off. So if I add more notes, it's going to add more triplets. Shift semicolon will turn it off, and then you can go back to writing regular notes. Now, if you want something other than a triplet, again, select the rhythm. I'll do sixteenths. I'll do semicolon. If you want 5/16, what you do is you write 5:4. So 5 in the space of 4, press return, and then add your 5 tuplet, just like that. And again, remember, shift semicolon to turn it off. You can also be more specific with the tuplets, which sometimes is helpful. Like if you want to enter swing tuplets, you select the quarter note. If I were to choose the triplet, I'm going to get a quarter note triplet, but I can also type it differently, 3E:2E, so 3 eighth notes in the space of 2 eighth notes, and it doesn't matter what rhythm I have selected at this point. Even though I have quarter notes selected, I can add the quarter note and then add an eighth note to get that swing type of triplet. And again, shift semicolon to turn it off. There is a grace note button over here, and this also has a right arrow, and so you can get either of those types of grace notes, and again, either select it, or the shortcut is the slash key, and that will make your input caret a little bit smaller, and I can add a grace note, and then the slash key will turn it off, and then I can add a regular note. I can add all kinds of different grace notes, so let's see, G, A, B, and then slash again to turn it off, and add another quarter note, etc. So that is the grace notes. There's also the tie and the scissors tool here, and they have the shortcuts T and U for untie. The thing is, in Dorico, you don't often need to use the tie tool manually. In fact, I have the quadruple whole note programmed to the 9 key here, so I can enter a quadruple whole note, and all of the ties get added for me automatically. I don't need to manually add all of those. But if you want to, you select that tie chain and press the U key will untie it all, or the T key will tie it all. One nuance here, though, is that if you enter into note entry mode and move over to the middle of that tie chain, the U key will untie it just in that one spot. So that could be a little useful tool in terms of the tie key. And of course, just the T will tie everything together as needed. Like I said, most of the time you don't really need to use that, but there are some occasions where it actually is important because there's certain things that you just can't do, and tuplets are a great example. So let me see if I can recreate this. Let's see, 5 in the space of 4, G, A, B, C, D. If I wanted to tie that last D to a triplet, so I'm going to undo the 5 tuplet, I'm going to move over to eighth notes, add a new triplet. I would have to press the T key in order to tie that D, because there's really no like durational value that this is equal to that would be convenient to add. So there is definitely some occasions where, you know, using the T key would definitely be required, and this happens to be one of them. So let's talk about that pitch before duration, which is going to be more similar to Finale's Speedy entry. It is the third button here down on the left. It's the K button, and that will enter you into pitch before duration. And now it's much more like Speedy entry, so you'd play the pitch on your MIDI keyboard, for example, and then press the rhythm, play the next pitch, press the rhythm, play the next pitch, press the rhythm. You can also use the letters on the keyboard to change the pitch, so you know, C and then an eighth note, B and then an eighth note, etc. So it sort of reverses it, and again, it's a little bit similar to Speedy entry, with one caveat. The thing is that the pitches are sticky, so you see that the B shadow is still there. I've released the B from the MIDI keyboard. I'm not holding the B. It's always going to be there. So if I enter another quarter note, you're going to get another B. This is different than Speedy entry because, you know, if you release the note, you're going to get rests. You can do something similar in Dorico. If you press the comma key, it will engage this rest button, and then 5 will actually indeed sort of skip over that empty rest space there. And then the next time you press a pitch, you're going to get another note, right? Of course, the space key does the same thing, and of course the arrow keys will always do the same thing as well. So if you need to add chords, you know, obviously if you're using a MIDI keyboard, this is really easy. Just play the chords in and you're good to go. But what if you're not using a MIDI keyboard? Well, the fourth button down here is the chords button, and it has the shortcut Q. So if you press Q, you're going to get a little plus sign next to the input caret. This is meaning you're in chord input mode. And then when you enter a pitch, you're just going to get a single pitch. The input caret is not going to move, which means that you can keep adding pitches to get a chord. Then to move on, press the space bar, and you can enter a new chord like that. So you can move pretty quickly like this if you're good with the computer keyboard and typing pitches and everything. And then Q, of course, will turn off chord mode. There's another feature I want to talk about called lock duration, and it's this icon here, and it has the shortcut L. This is very similar to the Simple Entries repitch tool, if you're familiar with that in Finale. And the way this works is that you select a pitch that's already inserted, press return to get into the note input mode, and then press L to turn on lock duration. And what this will do is it will repitch everything as you play it. So I can actually just on my MIDI keyboard just play brand new pitches. It will also work with the computer keyboard, so I can, you know, enter new pitches just like that. So that is also a handy tool if you're used to working with the repitch tool in Finale. It's called lock duration. It has the L shortcut, and again, L will turn it off. And then let's talk about the tool right below that. This is the clamp tool. It's called force duration. It has the shortcut O. Force duration is sort of like the last resort if you're not exactly happy with the way that the notation options are presenting rhythms or rests. You can use force duration and, you know, basically do anything you want, effectively making it kind of like Finale. So in Finale, you know, I could enter really weird stuff, right? 16th, quarter, dotted eighth, eighth, quarter, 16th. Oops, I entered too many. Let's make that a 16th. There we go. So I can enter some really awkward looking things without Finale questioning me in any way. If I were to try to do that in Dorico, let's see if I can repeat that. So 16th note, quarter note, dotted eighth, eighth, quarter, 16th, right? I can enter the same rhythm in Dorico, but it's going to sort of fix the rhythm so it's actually more readable. But what if I actually really wanted that funky rhythm? Well, you can do that with force duration on. So press the O key, and now if I do that same thing, 16th, quarter, dotted eighth, eighth, quarter, 16, right? I got one pitch wrong there, but you get the idea. If I do that, you can get that exact thing. The thing is that these notes now all are force durationed, right? They have force duration active. The icon here is blue. If I select anything else, it's not on, right? So this is permanent in a way. If I make any changes in the notation options, any changes to the note groupings or rests or anything with these force durations on, it's not going to do anything to this. So it is a double-edged sword. I really would only recommend doing this as a last resort when the notation options are just not giving you exactly what you want to do. If you're trying to do something unique or just ever so slightly different than what the notation options want to give you, then you can use forced duration. But use this sparingly. Yes, this can make Dorico behave much more like Finale. You're going to have to manually enter all your ties, etc., etc., etc. But again, it's double-edged sword. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. And of course, with all of these notes selected, if you press O to turn off forced duration, it will reset everything according to the notation rules. So that's forced duration. One other thing I want to talk about related to the input caret. Let me just go back to this. Press return. The input caret, you can navigate left and right, along the grid. The command key will navigate full bars. So command left and right will navigate forward or back a whole bar. The up and down arrows will navigate between staves like that, and command down will jump all the way to the bottom staff, command up will jump all the way to the top staff. And perhaps one of my favorite features of Dorico's input caret is that it can be expanded. By holding the shift key and pressing down, you can actually make that input caret cover all three of these staffs in this case. And then you can enter chords and Dorico will intelligently distribute them to those three staffs just like that. If you happen to enter single notes, then it will actually just enter unisons on all three staffs. So that is a really cool feature in my opinion. It allows you to enter multiple notes on multiple staffs simultaneously really, really quickly. So Finale, as you know, has a thing called layers. So let me just add some notes here in Finale in layer 1, and we know that in order to get to layer 2, if you're in Speedy entry, the shift down arrow will move to layer 2, 3, 4, and then back to 1, right? And if I'm in layer 2, I can add different notes and end up with something like that, right? Dorico has something similar, but they don't call it layers, they call it voices. So let me see if I can enter the same idea here. In voice 1, the thing about voices in Dorico is that every single staff initially only contains a single voice. There are an unlimited voices that you can add, but each staff starts with only a single voice. You have to get into a note input entry, get to where you want to enter the new voice, and then use this button here, which is create voice, or the shortcut Shift V. And Shift V, when you do that, you'll see your little icon change. It'll be a down stem and you'll have a plus. So now you can enter different rhythms here, just like that, and get something similar to what Finale does with layers. The important thing to realize here is that once you've added that second voice, the input caret changes a little bit. You don't no longer get the plus, and it's just a down stem. And then it's just the V key by itself to toggle back and forth between the up stem and down stem voices. If you keep pressing Shift V, you're going to keep adding voices, which sometimes is not ideal. You can, of course, add more voices. Go back to note insert mode and press Shift V again. And when you do that, now it'll say +2. You're asking Dorico to add a second down stem voice. If you wanted a second up stem voice, just press Shift V again, and it will switch it to a second up stem voice. And then from here, you can actually add more rhythms. And you can keep adding Shift V as many voices as you possibly want. But the important thing to realize is that it's the V key by itself that will toggle between all of the voices that are now created for that particular staff. So yes, that's how that works. And of course, just once you have all of these voices, just pay attention. Most of the time you want to be entering notes in the primary up stem voice. If you're used to Finale where you're seeing different colors for the voices, you can do that in Dorico too. In the view menu under note and rest color, choose voice colors and you'll see everything turn to a different color. Of course, it will always print black and white as normal, but that's definitely an option if you're used to seeing that in Finale. The other thing is that things like this, with this extra rest, Dorico is going to create these automatically to fill out the bar, sort of similar to how Finale does it. In order to hide that, what you actually do is go into the edit menu and about a third of the way down here, choose the remove rest option. Now, I've mentioned this before, but rests are really empty space in Dorico. So the interesting thing about doing this is that it doesn't actually hide the rest or remove the rest or delete the rest or anything like that. What it does is actually changes a property of the note previous to the rest. So if you go into the properties panel, it's this right here called end voice immediately. If I deselect that, it's going to do the default behavior, which is to end the voice at the bar line. So removing rest effectively turns on this property for the note previous, but that's a technicality really. The important thing is to just select the rest and choose the remove rest in order to do that. All right, and I'm determined to get through everything on the left panel here, so let me just keep forging ahead. Let's talk about slurs, and there is a button for that. Slurs are really easy in Dorico. You can just select a note and press that button, or it has a shortcut S, which makes a lot of sense. And you can select multiple notes and press S, and it will slur over all of it. You can even select multiple staves, like if I select all 3 of these and press S, you'll get slurs everywhere. And what's nice about slurs in Dorico, first of all, if you select a slur, you can always flip it with the F key. Of course, they'll go to the right spot if you have multiple voices and everything. But what's really nifty about these slurs is that if you select it, they behave the same way with those same shortcuts related to durations. So Option Shift right will extend the slur. Option Shift left will shorten the slur. Option right will slide the slur, and Option left will slide it left, right? So these shortcuts right here, they're actually pretty universal across many things in Dorico. So it's definitely worth getting used to. Option Shift right and left, Option right and left. Adding articulations is similar. You just select the note and there's 8 articulations that you can choose from. You can turn the accent on. And it's a little bit different. In Finale, you add an accent and you're sort of adding a thing to the note, just like that, and it is a thing that you can select and delete. You don't actually do that in Dorico. The articulations are more like properties of the note themselves. So the property is either on or off. So in order to turn off the accent, you deselect it, right? So it's a toggle more than anything. And of course you can choose them here in the left panel. Again, same thing, you can select multiples and select the staccato and then turn the staccato off. Or they have shortcuts, which I'm putting up on the screen hopefully right now. So the left bracket will give you your accents, etc., according to that list. And what's nice about both slurs and articulations is that they actually can be added while you're adding notes. So the way this works is that you add a note, and then you press the S key, and then you add another note, and keep adding more notes, and it will keep slurring those. To turn the slur off, you press Shift S. And then we can add another note and then press S again and then add another note, etc. When you want to turn the slur off, just press Shift S. It works the same way with the articulation. So if I want the next note to have an accent, I type the left bracket and then type the pitch and it has an accent. And I can keep adding the accents as long as I want until I turn the accent off. And you can combine adding slurs and articulations like this as needed. This is a really quick way to work in Dorico if you're just using a computer keyboard. Honestly, as a longtime Finale users, I'm so used to like adding the notes first and then adding the markings because that's how you're sort of forced to do it in Finale. That is definitely still available. It's just easy enough to select the notes that you need, put the markings that you need, add the slurs. It's pretty easy. And conveniently, when you have things selected in Dorico, just the right and left arrows will sort of move between things. So, you can add your accent there and then add a bunch of staccatos like that. So, yeah, there's a lot of different ways to do this. You can get used to trying to type them all in at once or do them later more in the Finale style if you want. And then one final thing I wanted to show you. In the Dorico preferences, in the note input and editing section here, these first 2 options, by default, specify pitch after duration. This is a default setting for Dorico, which will give you the duration before pitch. If you want Dorico to always be in pitch before duration, more similar to Finale's Speedy entry, select this option, press apply, and that will be pretty much permanent on your computer until you go back here and change it. Of course, you can toggle between them, as always, with the K key, but this is just setting how it starts when you start note input. So it's funny, I've been using Dorico for a while. I use it both ways with before and after duration, so I just leave it like this, and if I need it one way or another, I press the K key. And then this option here, specify accidental rhythm dot end articulations after inputting note or before inputting note. Thus far in this video, it's been set like this. So you've seen me add the rhythm dot before entering the note, which is a little bit opposite of Finale. So if you want to do it the Finale way, select this option, and this will allow you to enter the quarter note and then press the rhythm dot to make it into a dotted quarter note. So either way, if you want to get used to it the Dorico way or do it precisely more like the Finale way, you can set these options as you need to, and of course hit apply and close, and you'll be good to go. Alright, so that's all I have to say about write mode and everything in the left panel. On the next video, I'm hoping to cover everything in the right panel so we can add clefs and keys and time signatures. So we'll deal with these tools and their associated popovers in the next video, and I'm looking forward to that. So thanks for watching this one, and I will see you soon.